You're listening to Afternoons with Josh Szeps on ABC Radio.
It's 24 to 3. There was a vision of a kind of New York in Australia more than 100 years ago. The urban planner Walter Burley Griffin, famous for designing Canberra and Castle Crag in Sydney, had a vision for how you might be able to revolutionise Port Stephens, specifically North Arm Cove. Wanted to turn it into a bustling metropolis. There's an outline of a subdivision that he's sketched. People say it looks like a lost Mayan city. Is it possible that we could actually reconstruct North Arm Cove at Port Stephens into a thriving metropolis in New South Wales? Two architects want to revive Walter Burley Griffin's vision. They say, yes, it is possible. Dejan Simovic and Tatiana Duric-Simovic are with us from DSIM Architects. Thanks to both of you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Josh.
Where does this plan come from? Let's start with you, Dejan.
Well, it starts from 105 years ago when Walter Burley Griffin has actually discovered. He was at the lookout for a location for an eastern port for Australia that is going to be equivalent to New York in America, and he actually discovered Port Stephens and was looking for location and located North Arm Cove, as Port Stephens City at the time, as an ideal location for that port, deep water port, with a direct link through the mountains into the hinterland of Australia. That's what New York is for America.
Right.
So,
but New York quickly also became a metropolis in its own right, and we already had Sydney here. Was he thinking that this would become a port that would then grow into a city to rival Sydney?
New York became metropolis because it had that link to the, it was sitting on the Hudson River, linked to the canals, to the Great Lakes of interior of America. And Sydney Port, Sydney Cove, and other areas are not really. I mean, you have to go through the mountains to get to the.
Yeah, I see.
And basically, you can't run train through the. You don't have a train link, a very good train link with a.
We've been talking about that for the past 100 years and it still doesn't seem to be fixed. But yes, I take your point down. So the idea was you create this metropolis around a port in Port Stephens, and the hub that Walter Burley Griffin designs is in North Arm Cove. Why?
That's because the land was best for that kind of development. Best suited for a city. It's on high ground. It's not going to be flooded. It's it had resources that it is solid soil, so it's not the sand like most of the rest of the Port Stephens. Water was always a bit of a problem. It has 2 creeks, but they were really too small at the time. But so that's something that was resolvable. Karua River is nearby, and at the time, basically that was the area where first Australian agricultural company actually developed 100 years before that. Next year is 200 years that first Australian agricultural company got a grant from UK, from London, to develop the 1 million acres of land north of Port Stephens.
If you live in and around Port Stephens, or if you visit there regularly, I'd love to hear what you think of this. Have you heard of this scheme? Did you know that Walter Burley Griffin had planned a lost city, which he wanted to call Hope? Is that right?
No, that was.
Is this a subsequent incarnation?
No, that was one of the landowners there had named their property Hope.
And had perhaps a taste for salesmanship. I'd love to hear from you. 1300 222 702 is the phone number. Is this? Do you regard this as being a harebrained scheme? Do you regard this as being something desirable? If you could redevelop North Arm Cove in the vision of this lost city, according to the vision of Walter Burley Griffin. On the text line, one person says, Josh, there are parts of Tanelba Bay laid out by Walter Burley Griffin, as was a huge development of Jervis Bay, but parts of Kalala Bay show signs of his design as well. See the plan at the Jervis Bay Marine Museum. No buildings, but certainly town planning was evident. Tim in Hawk's Nest says, hi Josh, North Arm Cove is stunning. A metropolis would destroy it. Pave paradise to put up a parking lot. Please ask your guests to abandon this atrocious idea. Tatiana, how did you come across the idea?
Well, I have to correct you a little bit, Josh. Maybe we're not talking about metropolis, and then it may be misleading to say that we are talking about a high density as Manhattan or whatever. What we would like to do is to use what's really one of the best plan for the urban development that we have here in Australia, not to mention that Walter and his wife Marion Mahoney Griffin are world-renowned architects. So, but apart from that, their architectural principles and philosophy they developed to suit Australian soil and landscape. Plus, the example of that, we always use this as example if people are asking what's the vision. It's Castle Craig in Sydney, in Willoughby local government area, and it's well documented. There are those principles of architecture, which is quite logical, and there is no brainer. If you set up the city or a human settlement, the roads are following the topography, and then these other aspects of Walter's and Marion's philosophy that really are stood the test of time, and it's like been written this morning regarding the sustainability, environmental, development, etc., etc. So we are not talking about really development, a big development and parking lots. Just on the contrary, just something that will be maybe a model city, or model suburb, or model town, whatever you call it, that can maybe replicate and give some direction for further decentralization of Sydney area. And
what makes it special?
It makes it special because it's multi-layered, sort of. There is also a question of private property rights, a planning system, because at the moment there are about 3,000 plus individual owners of these lots, and only 150 or so of them were given permission to build a house. The rest cannot build a house, and this is something called in our New South Wales planning, it's called paper subdivision. So it is subdivision only on paper, so without much development. So it's a question of how are we going to resolve the private property rights of other 2,500 whatever owners.
I see.
And it will always be there. It's been there for quite. The plans were approved on 6th of May 1918. So if we have a continuity of government, which we do, and a country and a statehood, so what happened with that right?
What did happen then if they were approved in 1918? Why was it never acted on?
It's just over the time, simply there was no, how would I say, there was no pressure, and maybe not enough pressure from the owners to sort of exercise their rights. But many of the landowners today in this paper subdivision, they inherited these lots from their grandfathers or other members of extended family, or they bought themselves maybe 25, 30 years ago. And they've still been waiting. So it's like something that needs to be resolved. And if we are to resolve it, then let's do it in a sustainable way. And that's what we are proposing.
It's 2:45. You're with Josh Szeps on ABC Radio, right around New South Wales. We're joined by Dejan and Tatiana Simovic, who are here to explain their architects, and they're here to explain the plan to develop North Arm Cove, that's in Port Stephens, according to Walter Burley Griffin's original vision for what he wanted to make a sort of a template city. They talk about dreaming of a New York City in Australia, as Tatiana says. The idea of what a metropolis was 105 years ago and what it is today is probably a little bit different. So we're not talking about a high-density situation. We're talking about something like a leafy North Shore suburb of Sydney in North Arm Cove. It already got approval in 1918. It was just never acted upon. 1300 222 702 is the phone number if you're familiar with Port Stephens and have heard of this plan. Craig in East Maitland, g'day.
G'day, mate. How are you?
Terrific. What do you reckon?
If I'm old enough to remember, and if I hope I've got the right place, North Arm Cove actually being divided up and sold off into blocks of land already.
Yes.
It was extremely cheap because you could not build a traditional dwelling on it because it was pretty much a swamp.
No.
Like, my understanding is you'd have to fill the whole area at the. It's too low lying to put proper permanent dwellings on.
I think you were right about it having been subdivided, but wrong about the swamp bit, Craig. You might be thinking of somewhere else nearby, but I think that so. Tatiana, why don't you just respond to Craig or Dan?
It's definitely not a swamp. It's on a high ground, and it actually has hills and everything. That's why it was selected there. It's a very solid ground. Actually, it's a hard rock, so that could be a bit of a problem for infrastructure. But that's only small problem. Definitely, it's solid ground and usable. For a reason why it wasn't developed is because infrastructure was not there. So once in the 1950s, when subdivision became meaning having the infrastructure to build and provide housing or any other development, there was no enough money to put the infrastructure in.
Right.
It was too difficult to bring the sewer and water from tea gardens or from Karua. Way too much money. That has changed. We are now proposing to develop something that is self-sustainable, that is collecting its own water, having or obviously generating the power, like your guest yesterday proposed. So we are basically talking exactly what Sal was talking yesterday. So
that's Saul Griffith, who wants to rewire Australia and electrify everything.
Well, that's a part of it. Electricity is
so
just
making kind of model green town, so to speak. 1300 222 702 is the phone number. Should North Arm Cove in Port Stephens be redeveloped according to the vision of Walter Burley Griffin into a kind of a new modern green template town for that can be replicated elsewhere around Australia? 1300 222 702 is the phone number. On the text line, Dane says, "Hi Josh, Walter Burley Griffin also designed Oak Flats, southwest of Wollongong." Didn't know that. Rebecca in Winmalee says, Burley Griffin didn't design Canberra on his own. His wife was half the team. Marion Mahoney Griffin was a professional architect too. Not sure why I'm surprised she gets zero credit, says Rebecca. Sarah says, "Hi Josh, a friend recently purchased a waterside block for 70 grand, no building permission. As an architect, I was delighted to find the Burley Griffin plan when researching the area. Many of the road layouts are shown on maps and have evidence of clearing on the ground," says Sarah. Lindsay says, "This is silly talk. Talk to the locals. They won't let it happen. These architects need to find another gig." Richard in Crescent Head says, "Most of the blocks of land in North Arm Cove aren't zoned residential. The blocks are too small. Also, most of the roads are privately owned." And James in Ettalong says, "Come on, Josh, ask the obvious question of your guests. What's in it for them?" Tatiana?
Oh, it's just a professional. We are architects, and we have been accused of being elitists, to being communists or whatever. We propose affordable housing. We propose, so there is no money in it. I can say this openly. We've been,
But
this is unpaid work.
For a full disclosure, we do own the house there.
Yeah, we do.
We own a lot of land there that is not allowed to be built. But that is very similar to what Griffins were doing here in Castlecraig. Yeah. So they own the land there, they built on their own, they invested their own money. They bought the land to preserve it from building along the water, to preserve the bush along the water in Castlecraig. That is basically our investment in our idea, in our vision. So we kind of put our money where our mouth is. Obviously, risk. It might not develop. Might never happen. However, last year, North Arm Cove was highest growth of real estate in Australia, about 67%.
I just want to take a call from Steve. G'day, Steve.
G'day, Josh.
What's going on?
Well, back in the early 80s, my father and I were small-time earth-moving contractors based in tea gardens, and we built all the roads at North Arm Cove. Some interesting backstory to it is that the land is 3,700 lots, and it was owned by a Catholic nun who had inherited it from her family, and it was purchased by a Sydney consortium of developers, and they advertised it on TV as "Buy a piece of Australia for $4,999 a block." and they
Really?
contracted us to come in, and we went in, we cleared all the roads and slashed the place and made it look like a park, and with great resistance from Great Lakes Council at the time and a lot of locals. But as your guests are saying there, it's now in full private ownership, and the roads were never gazetted to the council, and it's zoned non-urban, and you can go and camp on your block for 60 days a year, I believe.
Is that right? Amazing. Thanks, Steve. Thanks for the call. Good on you. David in Manly, what do you reckon?
Well, hi, Josh.
Hi.
That was interesting from Steve,
Yeah.
because when you drive, well, my wife and I were driving up the highway a few years ago, your Google Maps shows this layout of roads at North Arm with all the names. There tend to be names of Australian towns and cities. And so we went in there, and as Steve said, he cleared the roads. If you've just got an ordinary four-wheel drive, you can drive on all these tracks, and it's a great layout. They're just bush tracks, but there are street signs for many of them saying Sydney Road and Adelaide Crescent and this sort of thing. And it would make a great green, fully sustainable little village. It's a beautiful spot,
Yeah, fantastic. It is gorgeous, but I mean, I think that's going to fuel part of the opposition to redevelopment.
That's exactly right.
David,
Yeah.
it's so beautiful as it is. Dan, so does Google Maps, when you actually look at a map of this, the official map shows something that does not exist on the ground, but did exist in the mind of Walter Burley Griffin? Is that not the point that David was making?
Subdivision is fully done. So Griffins were there. They done the subdivide.
But David was just saying, you drive along, it's all overgrown. There's just four-wheel drive tracks.
It's the latest. I mean, after that clearing in 1990s and resold to individual owners, there's a regrowth. In 20 years.
It's not what a layperson would think of as being a road.
No, there are roads. They are just not paved. They're the main roads into the existing village of about 150 houses.
I'm talking about Walter Burley Griffin's vision of the place, not the town that currently exists.
No, the streets are still laid according to the Walter's plans.
Right.
They're laid and they're dirt tracks, around. But the main road is paved. The rest is not paved.
So the mission is pave it all. So you're starting to sound like the parking lot.
It's not parking lot. If you call Castle Creek parking lot, let's be it. It's not. It will be really green, sustainable, new way of living. And when people are saying it's a small lots, it should be small lots and small houses because it reduces the ecological footprint. We have to learn to live smaller.
Right. What kind of population are we talking about?
Well, at the moment, if you say 3,000 lots, if the average household in New South Wales is 2.12, you can multiply and see how much would it be. Let's say about 7, 8, 9,000 in the first stage, but it won't be developed all at once. It will be staging development as we develop the off-grid infrastructure and everything else. Develop the special development controls and standards that council would sort of hopefully set up to be sustainable. Not covering your site in concrete. Not at all.
On the text line, one person says, at last, an idea from the past of a way to have transport to the west of New South Wales without the tragic ruining of the Blue Mountains, where both rail and road share a very narrow, crumbling ridge. Wendy in Balmain says, Walter Burley Griffin also designed the towns of Griffith and Leeton, as well as Cinema in Melbourne and much more. A man before his time, a genius, says Wendy. Josh, writes another person, why are all the texters being so aggressive to these guests? They're bringing up interesting historical points that nobody else has offered. Give them a go, you grumps, says Michael in Hazelbrook. People get very passionate about development, Michael. The moment you start talking about development, everyone wants to leave things exactly as they are. Neil in Ryde says, Josh, more houses will have to be built whether we like it or not. This possible project could take some pressure off, for example, southwest Sydney. And Joe says, I remember those ads. Only $5,000 for a block of land. Currently no permission to build, but what an investment for the future. We only have literally a minute left, Dan, but what's the final elevator pitch?
It's opportunity. It's huge opportunity. Council owns government owns 1,000 lots. So it's an opportunity to invest into for government to build affordable housing, build a development that is going to be innovative, that is going to be innovation precinct, where people like Mr. Griffith can test their, electric wiring cities.
And community batteries and all that sort of thing.
All of that. Let's test it. Let's try it. It's not going to be built at once. So we can test whole new technology, everything that comes after, and it's not for us. We are not going to see it built. We are doing that, and we have organized a student competition last year or a year before with their ideas about what they think to be done. It's all now, YouTube channel, and we can visit the Facebook page as well. It's a huge opportunity to build affordable, to build innovative, to build renewable.
Tatiana, last words?
Please sort of just support the legacy of Walter and Marion Griffin in Australia, if not worldwide, and please follow the Walter Burley Griffin Society media and a web page. Thank you.
What's your next step then? Just very quickly to get it done. Like, what do you do?
We need to make it into the state kind of priority for a state development rather than council. Because they don't have capacity to do it.
And
we have
also,
to make state significant development would be a great step forward. Yeah.
On the text line, Christine says, we've had a home in North Arm Cove for 17 years. It's a wonderful healing place and a very special community. We'd love to see some sustainable development, including town water and sewage. But even more importantly, a general store and a cafe would make it more likely for us to stay because we're getting older. And another person on the text line says, hi Josh, sounds like an amazing vision for North Arm Cove, but the locals in these coastal towns are vicious and they just say no to literally everything. So there you go. Thank you so much. If you're in regional New South Wales, have a wonderful afternoon. I'll see you tomorrow. If you're in Sydney, stick around.